In the autumn of 2007, a man named Lawrence Spencer opened his mailbox and found something that would permanently tether his name to the Roswell legend. It was a thick package, heavy with paper, and inside lay a collection of military documents stamped with dates from the 1940s. Some pages were mundane: duty rosters, maintenance logs, scheduling notes from Roswell Army Airfield. Others carried the stark red lettering of top secret classification. But the true payload was something far stranger: transcripts of interviews conducted with a non-human entity.
There's still a feeling like there's something very unusual about this. It was not something commonplace like they would like to say weather balloon or radar carrier.
The material claimed that in July 1947, Army personnel had recovered a surviving pilot from the wreckage that crashed in the New Mexico desert. At first, no one could speak to it. Linguists failed. Cryptographers were useless. Scientists threw every known method of communication at the being and got nothing back. Then, according to the transcripts, somebody realized that the visitor didn't use sound to talk. It spoke directly into the mind. Telepathy was the only channel that worked.
She looked like death one dose. She said, "You won't believe what happened." She said, "I've never seen anything so this." I said, "Well, look, you're a nurse." And I said, "Anytime you're in this business, you're going to see a lot of things." And I said, "You may as well get used to it." She said, "No, this is what it is."
Scrawled across those pages were prophecies, technological revelations, warnings, and a hidden war raging across the stars. It was bewildering, borderline absurd. And then Spencer turned to a single page that anchored the whole incredible account. It read, "Roswell AAF, 509th Bomb Group, Alien Interview, July 8, 1947. That was the moment he understood he was holding the deathbed confession of a woman who claimed to have been right there, face to face with a downed extraterrestrial. What Spencer did next, and what we later discovered about his background, would transform this narrative from a blockbuster UFO case into a masterclass on why humans cling so desperately to stories that make pain bearable. But before any of that collapse came into view, the package told the tale of a nurse with a secret so dangerous it could have gotten her executed. Her name was Matilda McElroy. She had served as a flight nurse in the Women's Army Air Force, attached to the 509th Bomb Group. On the morning of July 8, 1947, she arrived at the Roswell base and immediately sensed that something had torn through ordinary protocol. Armed guards stood at locations that the day before needed no protection. Strangers in both uniforms and civilian suits moved with the clipped unease of men who were in over their heads. Before Matilda could reach the hospital, 2 military policemen intercepted her. They were courteous, but left no ambiguity. She was being requisitioned, not invited. A colonel met her at a hangar entrance and explained that an aircraft had come down out in the scrub. They had rescued one survivor, but the creature refused to interact with its captors. Matilda was to assess whether it required medical treatment. She noticed he used the word "it," and that pronoun choice set off silent alarms in her mind. Then she stepped into a dim room at the rear of the hangar and saw what the colonel meant. Sitting on a low chair was a figure about 3 feet tall. Its skin was gray and smooth, its head oversized, entirely hairless. There were 3 fingers on each hand, no visible nose, no mouth, and no ears. To Matilda's medically trained eye, the body looked less like a living organism and more like a manufactured shell, a doll cast from some plastic or rubber compound, lacking internal organs and any reproductive anatomy. The military men treated it as a puzzle to be cracked. Matilda approached it as a patient. She settled herself calmly beside the being. There were no wounds, no bleeding, no signs of distress. As she leaned in to speak, a thought surfaced inside her own awareness that did not belong to her. It was gentle, clear, and unmistakably intentional. The message conveyed: the body was merely a suit. It didn't need food or air, but it did require water. Matilda was not afraid. The mental voice felt oddly familiar, even nurturing. She sensed the entity was female and posed no threat. She introduced herself using a directed thought, and the reply came the same way. Her name was Errol, and Errol told Matilda that she was the only person in the entire facility who wasn't throwing up walls of metal concealment. Over the next 6 weeks, Matilda sat with Errol day after day, conducting interviews that filled hundreds of pages of transcripts. The information Errol delivered peeled back the entire architecture of human existence. She described a conflict so vast and ancient that the lifespan of Earth was just a chapter in it. Two colossal civilizations, the Domain and the Old Empire, had fought across thousands of galaxies for longer than humanity had possessed language. The Domain eventually won, crushing the Old Empire's government, but the enemy left behind sprawling, automated systems seeded across countless worlds. Most went dark when the central regime collapsed, but one did not, and it was nestled inside our own solar system. Errol identified herself as an officer of the Domain, an entity that has existed as pure consciousness for time spans humans cannot comprehend. She used the term ISBE, Immortal Spiritual Being. According to her, all conscious life everywhere is an ISBE in its truest form. Physical bodies are optional vehicles, donned for missions and discarded when no longer needed. The gray, dull-like frame that sat in the Roswell hangar was a temporary ride, nothing more. Errol had been sent to investigate the lingering Old Empire machinery near this planet when an electrical discharge knocked her navigation offline and forced her down. The real shockwave came when Errol explained Earth's actual function. It wasn't a cradle of life. It was a penitentiary. Thousands of years ago, the Old Empire constructed a containment system here and began dumping political dissidents, artists, free thinkers, and any soul the regime considered dangerous. They called them untouchables. That label, Errol insisted, described every human being alive. We are all captured ISBEs, stripped of our cosmic abilities and crammed into biodegradable flesh that ages, gets sick, and dies. Death, which should liberate the spirit, instead triggers an automated processing mechanism. A field surrounding the solar system detects the departing consciousness and yanks it into a way station where memory is forcefully erased. Not just the recollections of the most recent life. Every trace of every previous existence is scrubbed clean. Then the system deploys hypnotic projections, tunnels of light, visions of deceased loved ones, welcoming spirit guides. Errol says that's why near-death experiences sound so eerily uniform across all cultures. It's programming, not paradise. After the wipe, fresh commands are embedded. Creation myths, moral codes, guilt triggers. Whatever it takes to ensure obedience in the next round. Then the spirit is shoved back into a newborn infant. Die, forget, return. An endless loop. Even the rapid biological decay of the human body is a deliberate containment parameter, designed to keep lifespans short enough that no one racks up enough time to piece the truth together. When Matilda asked the obvious question, could it ever stop? Errol gave the answer that transformed a science fiction concept into a personal revelation. Yes, you can break out, but you have to accomplish the one thing the entire prison is built to prevent. You must remember. And then Errol told Matilda that she, the nurse sitting across from an alien in a dim hangar, had already lived through this. Matilda was not a random human who stumbled into a first contact scenario. She was a former Domain officer, a member of a specialized battalion sent to Earth around 8,000 years ago to dismantle the Old Empire's prison apparatus. 3,000 officers and engineers established a hidden base in the Himalayas, mapped the solar system's security grid, and developed a plan to shut it down. They had everything in place. Then the automated defenses tagged them, not as saviors, but as escaped inmates. All 3,000 were captured, wiped, programmed, and fired back into human bodies. The Domain called them the Lost Battalion, and one of them, after thousands of years of recycled lives, was sitting in that chair communicating telepathically with a fellow officer. Matilda's ability to perceive Errol's thoughts was not some fluke psychic gift. It was training bleeding through the amnesia. Her instinct to treat the visitor with compassion, her lack of fear, her deep gut feeling that she knew this being, all were echoes of her original self. Over those 6 weeks, Matilda began to recover fragments of memory. She saw star charts in her mind. She understood technology she couldn't put into English words. She recognized the invisible architecture of the prison. For the first time in 80 centuries, a captured domain officer remembered who she really was. That created an immediate problem, because the military was documenting everything she said aloud. They couldn't intercept the telepathic exchange. The stenographer only transcribed what Matilda chose to speak, but trust between the nurse and her handlers eventually evaporated. On August 12th, they separated her from Errol. They decided to force the aliens' cooperation without the nurse present. Matilda watched from behind a glass partition as men affixed electroshock probes to Errol's head. They started with a low current. No response. They increased it. Still nothing. Errol turned and looked at Matilda one final time through the glass, and then the awareness behind those large eyes simply left. The body remained, an empty gray shell on a table. The military spent hours trying to revive her, but Matilda knew it was pointless. The being had exited the vehicle, and Matilda wasn't grief-stricken. She was relieved, because whatever Errol had shared with her in the silent space of telepathy, knowledge never captured in any transcript, was now way beyond the military's reach. The Army made Matilda sign an oath of absolute secrecy under penalty of death for treason. She signed. She returned to civilian life, kept her mouth shut, and lived with a truth that would have sounded insane to anyone else. As the decades passed, she occasionally reestablished brief telepathic contact with Errol's essence. She pieced together more of her original training. She knew how to disrupt the prison cycle. But time ran short. By 2007, Matilda was 83 years old and dying of cancer. Her body was shutting down. Once dead, she would be recycled, wiped, reprogrammed, and planted into an infant with no memory of anything she had learned. In desperation, she read a book called The Oz Factors, written by Lawrence Spencer, a man who openly explored unexplained phenomena. Something about his worldview convinced her he might actually listen. So she gathered every document she still possessed, packed them into an envelope, and mailed them to him with a handwritten letter that read, in part, "I have kept this secret for 60 years. Now I'm 84 years old. I decided to tell this story because I think people should know the truth." She added a grim postscript. "I'll be recycled through the amnesia process and stuck back into another baby body to start all over again without any memory of what went on before. These documents must be published." Spencer released the transcripts in 2008 under the title Alien Interview. It became an instant phenomenon in UFO circles. Readers devoured it in single sittings. Many said that the book didn't feel like reading. It felt like remembering. They wanted to know more about Matilda. Where was she? Had she left behind children, grandchildren, any way to trace her? And above all, who was she now? By the timeline of reincarnation Errol described, Matilda's spirit would be about 17 or 18 years old today, perhaps working a summer job, stressing over exams, scrolling through her phone late at night. Maybe, on those rare quiet moments, she senses something larger pressing at the edges of her consciousness, a purpose she can't articulate. Somewhere beneath the homework and the never-ending notifications lies the knowledge to dismantle a multi-millennia prison. Now, it's an intoxicating idea. It's also a house of cards that began to wobble the instant researchers started pulling on threads. First, they hunted for Matilda's service record. It didn't exist. There was no trace of a Matilda O'Donnell McElroy in the military archives. Defenders pointed out that the book said she'd changed her name and entered witness protection, which would explain the vanished paper trail. Then readers noticed small linguistic anachronisms in the transcripts. Words like computer and database peppered documents supposedly from 1947, terms that didn't enter common vocabulary until the 1960s. Date stamps followed European formatting, day before month, rather than American military style. Spencer explained he had lightly edited the material for readability without altering the substance, so some modern phrasing could have crept in. But then, a bigger red flag surfaced. In an interview dated July 9, 1947, Errol cited Jonas Salk as an example of human genius. While Salk was alive in 1947, but he was an obscure medical researcher at the time. He didn't become internationally famous until 1955, when his polio vaccine changed the world. Defenders argued that a timeless, consciousness-traveling being like Errol might perceive time non-linearly and reference future events. Now, it's a convenient patch, but skeptics didn't buy it. The real collapse came when researcher Bill Ryan, founder of Project Avalon, put Alien Interview under a forensic comparison with the doctrine of the Church of Scientology. Line by line, the core concepts matched with eerie precision. The idea that we're immortal spiritual beings, called thetans in Scientology, who have forgotten their true nature. The notion of implant stations between lives that wipe memories and project false after-death imagery. A galactic war between rival civilizations, one of which traps souls on a prison planet. Doll-like bodies used as vehicles. Religions engineered as controlled mechanisms. The entire cosmology of Alien Interview was essentially Scientology's space opera theology dressed in Roswell khakis. And Lawrence Spencer was perfectly positioned to borrow that material. He had been a Scientologist for 31 years. In an email to author Graham Hancock, he admitted his earlier book, The Oz Factors, applied L. Ron Hubbard's principles through the lens of The Wizard of Oz. That same book was the one Matilda supposedly read and cited as her reason for choosing Spencer as her confidant. The origin story of the entire case loops back to a book built on Scientology. Spencer's next project simply swapped Oz for Roswell and substituted Hubbard's framework with a fictional nurse. When skeptics demanded to see the original documents Matilda allegedly mailed, Spencer confessed he had burned them. Every transcript, every letter, reduced to ash. He said he didn't want to spend his life hounded by UFO investigators or government agents. Destroying the only physical evidence is not a move that screams credibility. It screams cover-up of a fabrication. Spencer went on radio shows and insisted the interview genuinely occurred, that he was merely the editor, not the author. Yet he also published a sequel in 2011 called Domain Expeditionary Force Rescue Mission, this time explicitly labeled as science fiction. In it, Matilda is rescued from the prison planet and reinstated as a domain officer. Same characters, same mythology, but no pretense of nonfiction. Bill Ryan's investigation revealed more than surface similarities. Specific phrases and narrative sequences were lifted almost verbatim from L. Ron Hubbard's writings. The book's acknowledgments even thanked Wikipedia, particularly its Roswell page, which is not the gold standard of esoteric sourcing. Spencer had woven his fiction atop a foundation of real Roswell witness testimony, which gave the story its unsettling plausibility. Actual military officers, morticians, and nurses who were at Roswell in 1947 did come forward later in life with fragments of strange stories. Those genuine accounts provided the scaffolding. Spencer inserted his Scientology-derived creation myth into that framework, and the hybrid felt authentic enough to captivate millions. And captivate it did. Reviewers described being unable to put the book down. Some called it the most important text ever written. One common thread was the sensation of recognition, as if the narrative unlocked something buried in their own minds. That emotional response wasn't fake, even if the source material was. Spencer stumbled into a profound psychological truth. The prison planet paradigm offers a compelling answer to why life hurts. It reframes everyday suffering as the direct result of enemy action. Your limitations aren't your own fault. You aren't a meaningless product of random biochemistry on an insignificant rock. You are a magnificent, eternal consciousness temporarily shackled. Your forgetfulness isn't a flaw. It's a weapon deployed against you. And best of all, the escape hatch exists. If enough people wake up, the walls fall down. Now that's a message of radical hope, and it sells because it soothes a wound that raw materialism leaves wide open. A widower who lost his wife to cancer reads this book and imagines she's not truly gone, just stuck somewhere in the recycling loop, waiting to be remembered. A teenager who never fit in suddenly entertains the possibility that her alienation is a sign of suppressed power, not social failure. Now, these aren't gullible people. They're people who desperately want meaning, and a well-told fiction can temporarily satisfy that hunger. The truth is that Alien Interview was a meticulously constructed hoax, assembled from the theology of a sci-fi writer who built a religion. L. Ron Hubbard was himself a prolific pulp fiction author before founding Scientology, and the cosmology of thetans, implants, and galactic overlords reads exactly like what it is, a space opera repurposed as doctrine. Spencer, a decades-long adherent, transplanted this universe onto the Roswell mythos and wrapped it in the authenticity of a dying woman's confession. Matilda McElroy, if she ever existed at all as a distinct person, almost certainly never sat across from a telepathic gray being. The dates, the vocabulary slips, the burned evidence, the Scientological DNA, all point to invention. Yet the hunger the book fed remains genuine. Now, we all know on some level that we're not getting out of here alive. Mortality is the raw deal that no amount of technological progress is voided. A story that offers an escape clause from that reality is going to land with some force. Now, the painful follow-up question is what we do once we realize that this particular escape clause is imaginary. Perhaps the real takeaway is not about decoding alien messages or dismantling cosmic prisons. It's about recognizing that our deep need for purpose can be exploited, and often is. The same instinct that makes the person vulnerable to a fabricated Roswell narrative can also be directed towards something nourishing. If the idea of a prison planet stirs you, ask what that tells you about your current life. What feels imprisoning? What potential lies dormant? Now, those are legitimate signals. You don't need an alien war to validate them. Spencer's creation may be fiction, but the reader who felt a jolt of recognition wasn't completely delusional. She was responding to an archetypal story: the sleeping god, the amnesia of incarnation, the quest to reclaim lost power. That appears in countless traditions long before Hubbard put his stamp on it. The poison is in mistaking one specific retelling for literal fact. And for Matilda, the woman at the center of it all, if she was a real person, her legacy isn't the cosmic liberation she hoped for. It's something smaller, but maybe more valuable. Her story, real or constructed, forces a confrontation with mortality. That confrontation can either send us spiraling into elaborate escape fantasies, or it can jolt us awake to the present. Every day we get is irreplaceable. Knowing that the ride ends shouldn't paralyze us. It should sharpen our focus. If the Prison Planet tale has any truth behind its artifice, it's this: amnesia is optional when it comes to the preciousness of time. You don't need to recover past lives to appreciate the one you're in. You don't need an ancient war to explain suffering. You just need to look around and see that pain is real and that small kindnesses are the only proven cure. And you definitely don't need to track down a reincarnated domain officer to discover that your own life carries weight. Spencer's book became a bestseller because it let people feel chosen and eternal. The cold fact of its fabrication doesn't erase that emotional experience. But the healthier path isn't to cling to a cosmic conspiracy. It's to take that longing for significance and invest it in the tangible, fleeting, beautifully ordinary moments that actually compose a life. The thought that a 17-year-old somewhere might be the reincarnation of a starfaring engineer certainly is romantic. But the 17-year-old herself doesn't need that identity to matter. She already does. Thank you for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.